You might be thinking, what other alternatives out there exist in investing in real estate in Toronto, in the GTA, that maybe you're sick of doing just the typical condo investment, buy a pre-construction condo, put your investment down, 20% over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then wait for it to be built and then hope for the best, right? There's other stuff out there, and it deals with something called forced appreciation. Now, let me step back and talk about why you can't force appreciation in condos. Well, basically, you can't do anything. You can't increase the space. You can't increase the square footage. You can't add more bedrooms. Well, typically you can for larger ones, but that's still not the same. The issue with investing in condos, don't get me wrong, it's a great strategy. It's just that you're dependent on the market, right? And you can see in the past couple of years, rates have gone up, so prices have gone down. We're talking about down 15 to 20% in some markets, depending on where you're at. And you have no control over that. It's not a good time to sell. But what if you could force the value in any market, no matter what? And how do I do that? Well, let's talk about, for example, we got one for sale right now. It's just down the street from our office, 253 Broadview Avenue. So what that is a storefront with 2 apartments up top, and there's a basement downstairs that goes with the storefront as well. So the owner of the building actually bought it for his original business that he was using. The pandemic hit, he moved out somewhere else. Anyway, he ended up renting it out. But if you're an owner-occupied business, say you were an accountant firm or a law firm or like even a real estate shop or anything, selling plants, for example, you could occupy the main floor, the business itself, use the basement for your own apartment, or even take one of the apartments upstairs, rent out the other one, or rent it all out. Keep the storefront and just rent out the 2 apartments and cut the basement into an apartment because there's a separate door in the back. So you can see how that could increase the value of the place, right? So when you're talking about small multifamily or even any kind of multifamily or even kind of multiplex in general, the name of the game is increasing the income that comes in. If you look at a value of what a business is, it's usually just a statement of cash flows, a statement of discounted cash flows even. So you're buying, the business of owning that property is buying the rent, buying the cash flows that come in. And if you can increase that cash flow, then guess what? Your property is worth more. So let's look at the example right now, 253 Broadview. The retail store gets about $3,500 a month. They pay TMI for that, and let's call it about $1,000. So all in, they're about $4,500. And if you don't know what TMI means, it basically stands for taxes, maintenance, and insurance. In commercial real estate, the rent generally is net, which means net to the landlord. So that the landlord, whatever you pay them, that rate, that net rate, it means that that's what they get net in their pocket. Wonderful thing about commercial real estate is that you get net rents. When they say triple net rent, it means that you're also not paying for taxes, not paying for maintenance, and not paying for insurance as well too. And that's a great thing. The problem with net rents, commercial real estate for that matter actually, is that there's a lot of vacancies. So that could be an issue. But in this place, there's not that much vacancy. We're down the street from Lady Marmalade, which is a marmalade, I forgot what it's called. But anyway, it's a great restaurant. You see lineups throughout the day on weekends for brunch. And, Broadview is turning into a really good destination for people in Leslieville. And as the east fills in a little bit more, people just kind of come here as a destination. The good thing about this property is that we're right off Dundas, right off the DVP, easy access to get off onto the DVP if you want to. You have Leslieville, you have the streetcar coming, the subway coming. There's a streetcar there already, but you have the subway line coming from the East Harbor. And once the East Harbor is built, it's going to be magnificent. It's just like a 1 kilometer walk away, I think, something like that. It's pretty close by. It's going to be this huge site with tons of offices, a bit of residential. It's going to be the largest mall in Ontario, I think. It's larger than Yorkdale, I think it's going to be. And there's also a big transit hub. So the GO train will go there, transit will go there as well too. And just look it up, East Harbor, you'll see what I'm talking about. Like the development there is just insane. So that's happening. If you look at the revenue, so $4,500 there. The rental for the front right now is getting $2,975, and the back they're getting a bit of a discount because they got it early on, but just under $2,500, right? And then we're not charging any extra for parking. You could do that eventually if you wanted to, but that works out to basically $119,000 a year in income. Now, of course, there's expenses along with that. So there's insurance, there's gas, water, hydro, property taxes. Some things aren't factored in here is the property management, but honestly, there's really not much to manage here. I mean, we can help you with property management if you ever need it, but if you self-manage it, There's really no expense to that. Now, I understand some lenders will factor that in, but let's just forget about that for a second. And let's just say you self-manage it and you look at your own cash flows. The reason why I say it's not that much different for this property is because the gas, water, and hydro is actually separated for that actual building, except for water, I shouldn't say that. Gas and hydro are separate. So there's 3 gas meters, there's 3 electric meters, there's 3 water tanks. The water is just one bill though, because you can't have separate water meters through the city of Toronto. You can't do sub-metering as well too, unfortunately. So that's an expense that the landlord has to pay the owner. So your net income works at $101,000. And let's look at some of the cap rates, right? So the cap rate is basically the capitalization rate. It's when you take the net operating income, you divide it by the purchase price, and you get a cap rate. And the reason why that's important, 4.63, the reason why that's important is just a quick test to see the difference between what this storefront will buy you versus another one, versus another investment out there. So condos, in my opinion, if you factor the same formula, you take the rental income, you minus all your expenses, condos fees, taxes, all that kind of stuff, which you don't get to cover from the residential tenant, all that stuff, the cap rate works out to about 2.5%, maybe 3% at the very highest, at least in the city of Toronto. So it's not very good for cash flows. If you go to some smaller towns throughout Ontario or even parts of the States or anywhere in the world, like I'm talking about the rural towns, you might see cap rates of 7-8%, which means that the rental rate is much higher than this relative to the purchase price, or the other way around, the purchase price is lower compared to the rent that you get. Now, obviously, there's some upsides and downsides of getting in rural areas, remote areas, such as the tenant population. You'll probably end up with more vacancies than you would in a big city like Toronto. And it's just, yeah, the cap rate sounds nice, but that shouldn't be everything. It's a good comparison to look at from when you look at one property to the next, to the next, to the next, and you kind of get an average of what it should be. So how that works is you can work that inversely. So let's just say that the net operating income was fixed and you're looking at let's just say it's this amount here, 101,000. And let's say that the average purchase of this type of property in this area is, call it 4%, okay? And that's kind of on the average of City of Toronto, that's kind of what things are. So really the valuation should be this divided by the cap rate to get the other way around. So really it should be worth about 2.5 million dollars. But right now we're selling it at 2.2. That's a pretty attractive cap rate. And the gross rent multiplier is another good ratio that you should use. First of all, none of these ratios you should be looking at in isolation of each other. There's a whole bunch of things you got to look at, whether it's the gross rent multiplier, the cap rate, cash flows even that you get out of it, just the future possibility of the land itself, that maybe there might be a development property. Maybe in the future, actually, the site could be a condo site. If you group together with a few bunch of people on that row, and it's big enough, the land, to be able to turn it into a condo site. And as you see these parking lots and storefronts and all that stuff turn into condo sites in downtown Toronto, who knows, in 15 years, a lot can happen. And the other one that I like to look at is a gross rent multiplier. Basically, it's just the price of the real estate, so the purchase price divided by the gross rent income. And the rough number that the GRM, or gross rent multiplier, gives you is roughly the amount of years that it takes to pay off the property. Make sense? So given this scenario, if we're looking at a $2.2 million with the gross rents of close to $120,000, roughly it'd be 18.5 years to pay it off. Obviously, the lower the gross rent multiplier number is, the better it is as an investment, which basically means that the purchase price is lower relative to the gross rent that you're getting. Gross meaning that, it's just the gross income that you're getting in before deducting expenses. So if all the expenses are paid off, then that's what you would get. Now, if the purchase price was lower, of course you get a lower gross rent multiplier, and that's good. Higher gross rent multipliers are not so good. And in my experience, anything over 20 is kind of high. So using this example, if the purchase price was, let's just say 2.55 million, or the value was that, and gross rents were the same as before, you would end up getting a gross rent multiplier of 21.4. See, it doesn't make sense when it's that high, above 20. So you would take this and just as a first glance, you say, it's too expensive, or there must be a reason why it's so expensive. And that reason might be that because we're very close to the East Harbor and there's upside potential here, and maybe it could be a development site in the future. Now, I'm going to look at something else. I'm going to look at what could be potentially done in this place. Now, we look at the potential rent, and as I said, if you increase the valuations and you increase the rental roll, you increase the valuation. So just by renting out for market rents, and the market rents we're going to say here is that for the retail store, it's actually worth $40 a square foot net. Plus, you have a basement space, let's call it $20 a square foot. So the main floor is 1,244 square foot and the basement's the same footprint. So that roughly works out to $75,000 a year at $6,000 a month, let's call it, okay? And then if you include TMI, which I think, let's just keep it the same, $1,000. It might be a little bit higher than that. But, you know, in reality, it should be the actual amount that they're consuming, what the taxes are, what the maintenance is, and what the insurance is. But for this property, you can't really divide it out that much because the tax component is all built into one. There's no separation between commercial taxes and residential taxes. And then there's the maintenance. I mean, like, what's the percentage of the apartment owners versus the storefront? Like the snow shoveling, for example, right? Like, you know, all that is actually done by the tenant, by the way, so they don't pay that, but insurance as well. Okay, so the rental rates for the market rent for the front apartment is $3,000, a little bit higher than what we're getting now. And then the rear is about $3,200, which is significantly higher than the back than what we're getting right now. But the reason why is because in the back, there's an extension to that area. So there's actually more square footage there. Now, I left parking the same, but let's just say an example where you took the main floor, the retail, when the tenant leaves, and instead of renting out the basement to include it in the main floor, you take that and you actually add it as a basement apartment instead. That's separate. So let's say the retail store works out to $40 a square foot per year times 1244 square foot. You're looking at $49,000. But in the basement, let's call this basement apartment. You carve that out, and you know, actually there's a staircase in the back and there's a rear entrance that you can actually use that as a separate basement because it actually has a bathroom and it has a four-piece bathroom, three-piece as a tub, so four-piece, and then it also has a kitchen as well too, like a full kitchen. So let's say you rent that out for $2,200 times 12 months, you're looking at $26,000. So all in, you're looking at about $162,000. And then all of a sudden, the expenses are relatively the same. You might have a little bit of increased water. Hydro might be a little bit extra because now somehow you have to include that hydro because there's only 3 meters and the main floor would be the same hydro as the basement hydro, right? So you got to give some sort of allowance to the main floor tenant for that. Your net operating income becomes $145,000. And all of a sudden, because it's the same purchase price, we're not asking for any more money, the cap rate becomes 6.6%, which is huge. So let's do that math again. And you say it's 4% cap rate. And the income is still that new potential income that we're going to get, $145,000. And then you take this amount and you divide that by the cap rate. And what do you get? Increased valuation of $3.6 million. That's huge. So if you take this minus that, then you basically increase the value by $1.4 million just by getting market rents. That's insane. Okay, and then the gross rent multiplier, if you left everything the same, $162,000 divided by the purchase price, you're looking at 13.5 years. Roughly, now it's not exact, but it could take 13 years to pay off the property and own it. It's just like a litmus test to make sure that the purchase of this one relative to what else is out there, without doing any deeper analysis of the future potential and what's going on behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff, kind of makes sense. So if I were you, I would consider buying this property. And if not this one, there's plenty of other commercial properties that might be an alternative to buying something like a regular condo, or pre-construction condo, or even like 5 of them even, or even a residential house. There's lots of opportunities to make money in Toronto. As much as people say that it's expensive here, there's a reason why it's expensive if you're looking at it in a long-term lens, because it's a large city and we're going to continue to snowball and continue to grow. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video. Hope you enjoyed it.